Hello, good afternoon. It's 3 minutes past 3. Now, look, I want to have a really interesting conversation with you, but also one that I think has a purpose, and that purpose is to try to break down the stigma that surrounds mental health issues in this country. And I feel strongly about it because I know lots and lots of people who have suffered with everything from depression caused by stresses and anxiety in their lives, issues with really big life events happening, all the way through to people who have experienced quite serious psychiatric disorders. And I think there is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. Of course there isn't. The key word in the phrase mental health issues is health, right? If you were to break your arm, everybody would talk about it, and there would be no stigma attached. If you are having a tough time with your emotions and your feelings and your mental health, it is just the same thing. It's just you can't see it. There is no physical manifestation of it. We're talking about this because I think actually rather bravely, Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, has been doing an interview with the Sunday Times in which he talks about how his brother how his brother took his own life. And he says that there is a sense of what I think is termed survivor's guilt. In other words, he had been working as the Home Secretary at the time. He was very busy. And he says, I probably didn't have as many conversations with my brother as I should have at the time. And he says, it makes me feel as though I wasn't there for him, and I don't want any other families going through what we then went through afterwards, and I wish I had been there to help. And he said this because he was visiting a mental health charity called Papyrus, and he talks very specifically about men and their mental health issues, and he talks about how actually for men there is a sense, isn't there, even now in 2022, that men have to somehow be superhuman and mustn't show any signs of cracking because that isn't masculine. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary that anybody should be made to feel that way now, don't you think? I'm very pleased to say that I'm joined by Dr. Bharat Pankhania. He is Senior Clinical Lecturer in Public Health Medicine at the University of Exeter. Dr. Pankhania, isn't it brilliant that we're actually talking about this today?
It is. Good afternoon, Sangita, and our listeners. It is an important, very important subject to talk about. As you were giving your report, I was reflecting on when I used to lecture on this issue, and I used to say, if you have a myocardial infarction, in other words, a heart attack, you will get an ITU bed that hour, hopefully. And on the other hand, if your mind is broken, you will be most unlikely to see a specialist, a psychiatrist, or get a psychiatric bed for months on end. And therein lies our problems with looking after mental health, which is much, much more common than your heart attack.
Listen, my understanding is, and you can tell me if this figure is correct, 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue in their lifetime.
Indeed, and that is also the tip of the iceberg that we are aware of. It is part of the human condition that sometime in our life we will feel anxious, depressed, low, and then a small percentage go on to have those psychotic episodes, and then a smaller percentage still have permanent, what we would call schizoaffective psychosis, and they need looking after forever.
Yeah. And when we talk about mental health, it is what you've just described, such a broad span, right? So there is low-level depression at one end, which can be caused by a multitude of issues. And with the right therapy and help, and sometimes medication, you can get over that. And then, as you say, at the other end of the spectrum are really serious psychiatric disorders. You mentioned there a crisis in mental health care in this country. Just outline what that is at the moment.
So we have, through decades, reduced the capacity, the bed capacity for mental health services. We took the line of we will do care in the community, which means people who needed looking after, we would look after them in little houses and little homes and be well managed. But unfortunately, there are many, many people who do need hospital beds, and we haven't got them because we cut them. We closed down beautiful mental health hospitals. I'm not saying that we needed as many beds as we had before, but we've cut down a bit far too much.
Can I ask you something? Why have the cuts fallen, and some people say disproportionately, on mental health support? Is there any interplay between the cuts falling there, and very little resistance to it, quite frankly, and the fact that we still feel uncomfortable about talking about mental health issues?
Well, in a way, Sangita, you answered the question, which is there is a drama if you have a sudden heart attack. There is a drama if you have a road traffic accident and your leg is fractured, etc. Whereas with mental health, there is a subject that we don't like to talk about, and therefore its advocates are fewer. There isn't that drama of sir, madam, pupil, person are feeling low and they need support, and they haven't got the advocate. So when people wish to cut that cake smaller, easy to do and easily done, and they've done it. And unfortunately, we also have health economists. Health economists are brilliant, but health economists are not psychiatrists. They're not mental health experts. So the health economist says on a cost-by-cost basis, well, we can cut it like so. What they cannot take into account are, for example, take Sajid Javid. His brother ended his life. Sajid is left damaged, is left upset for decades on end, and that cost is never built into the funding, that if a bad event were to happen, it leaves the survivors with a cost, and that cost was several years and decades, if not forever. You see, and when you cost it like that, you would actually say, you know what, mental health is everyone's business. We should invest in it, and we should break down these taboos. You mentioned to your workforce, by the way, I feel depressed. People see it as, this is my weakness, my boss will use it against me.
Yeah, you can't cope at work, you shouldn't be here, you get sidelined for promotions and all that kind of thing. It's interesting, actually. One of the things I'm asking my callers today is, have you experienced stigma when you tried to talk about your mental health issues? How do you feel about talking about it? Are you worried people will look at you as lesser or somebody who can't cope? Because many of us keep those mental health issues really quite well hidden. And if you want to answer any of those questions, 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973. But Dr. Pankhania, can I ask you, Sajid Javid said something really interesting. There are two things he's focusing in on: men feeling that they can't talk about their mental health issues, and also culture, and some cultures being more adverse to talking about it than others. Let's take men first. Is that something that happens in your experience? Are they less likely to come and seek help?
Oh, absolutely. We have a get on with it culture. Pull your socks up and get on with it, man.
Oh.
And listen, Sangita, if I were to confess, when I was a young GP, I was young and inexperienced, and that was the attitude I became a GP with. And then when I saw so much of it in general practice, I said to myself, there's something here that I don't understand. I'm going to take time off and go and do psychiatry to learn about anxiety, depression, and all those human issues that I was not well trained for. Yeah. Most people are not like me. They just continue and carry on. I wanted to know my subject better and then look after my patients better. So I took time off to learn about it. And when I learned about psychiatry, you learn about that culture, that avoidance. We don't want to talk about depression because it doesn't look good, it doesn't look strong enough.
It doesn't look masculine to talk about it. Because levels of suicide amongst young men are shockingly high, right? And people say that's because even now, the culture is that men mustn't show weakness, I guess.
It's that, and the other bit also, unfortunately, is economics. So when men are brought up to be the breadwinners, the leaders, the kings, etc., and then there is unemployment, they're not bringing home bread, then that depression, anxiety, loneliness, it escalates. And unfortunately, with ready access to lethal means, men take their lives more so than women.
Well, there is this extraordinary figure, isn't there, that's constantly repeated. Suicide is the biggest cause of death in men under 50. And about 3/4 of deaths by suicide every year are men. It's just tragic. May I ask you, I want to talk to you about cultures. Britain is made up of many cultures, right? I'm of Indian heritage originally. I don't know how much actual work in terms of analysis has been done, but I feel very much that within even British Indian culture, to talk about your mental health is something that makes people look away, and people find it embarrassing. Members of my own family, I've tried to talk about mental health openly. I did. Oh gosh, I might as well just say I'm almost confessing everything on this program. I'm here for a while. The listeners might as well know. Back in 2005, I suffered a bout of depression. It was a really serious bout of depression. It was brought about by, quite frankly, 3 really massive things happening in my life at the same time, and I was working full time, and in the end, I think my body and my brain just said, you can't cope with anymore, and I didn't have enough coping mechanisms in place, and it was one thing after the other. It was I might as well tell you, it was 2 bereavements, a car crash, and then on top of it, a relationship issue that was massive, and it all happened at once. And I found it incredibly difficult to cope. And I had to take 3 months of unpaid leave. Talking to your employers, I tell you, it was not easy. When I went to see my GP, he said to me, on your sick note, for the first 2 weeks, I'm not writing it's a mental health issue.
Yes.
I will write that you are fatigued.
Yes.
Now, this is back in 2005, a long time ago. And he said, I'm writing your fatigue because I don't want it to damage your career. Can you believe it? So,
no, I can.
And actually he was trying to protect me. Anyway, ever since then, actually, this is going to sound again a very odd thing to say. It was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me. I took unpaid leave, and I reflected on my life, and I just changed a lot of things, right? Changed everything from exercise regimes to what I ate to the people I surrounded myself with. I learned about who could support me and who couldn't support me. And I feel that it was a really positive experience for me. I was very lucky. It wasn't in that sense, in the great scheme of things, it wasn't a massive episode, right? But I can tell you now, I think, as a British Asian person, my family, some of my family, to this day, cannot talk to me about what happened, even though I'm quite an evangelist for talking about these things. They find it weird and awkward, and why is she talking about it? And it's all a bit embarrassing. I think that is heavily overlaid with the fact that I come from British Indian culture. And there's nothing scientific that tells me that. This is just what I am saying. There are a couple of members of my family, I might add, who are absolutely superb, 2 or 3 of them. Sajid Javed today talking about his British Pakistani heritage and saying something, frankly, very similar to what I have just said, that there is something within British Pakistani culture that holds people back. Dr. Pankhania, you are clearly from, I would say, an Indian heritage.
I am.
Would you agree with anything that I've just said?
Oh, absolutely, Sangita, and more. You're being moderate. This is a huge subject, because when you are depressed and you cannot go to your mother or your brother or your sister or your relatives, you are in a caged prison. You are on your own. And unfortunately, those cultural taboos not only relate to us, so there are Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Afghanis, Africans, big issue, huge issue, especially amongst our African friends and brothers. They cannot talk about my mind isn't right. And what we have to do as a nation, as a multicultural nation, is Be aware that just because some people can talk about their mental illness doesn't mean everyone can.
Yeah.
And be sensitive to it. And of course, we've got to break those taboos, but it's not easy because it is generations worth of ingrained mental illness, bad news, don't talk about it. We don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's not seen in a positive light. Whereas it is a biochemical imbalance. Everyone gets depressed. It's 1 in 4.
And sometimes you just get exhausted and,
Yes.
you just, your body cannot cope. Actually, interestingly, and I don't know, I've got to let you go because we've got loads of calls and I want to get to them. But can I just raise one thing? Because actually, if you're listening at home, 0345 6060973, and you are a second or third generation immigrant, I'd be very interested in hearing from you. The reason is, I think, certainly in my case, in the case of other friends of mine who are second and third generation immigrants, we were under so much pressure to perform and frankly to outperform our peers. And it meant that we would put ourselves under vast amounts of pressure. And I do think that can also land us in trouble when we don't mean it to.
But Sangita, if I can tell you something towards the end now, is this. When I was taking histories from patients as they were coming in when I was doing psychiatry, my overwhelming second thoughts in my brain whilst I was taking the history was, this boy, this man, this girl, this lady needs a hug.
Yeah.
And we don't do enough of that. Come here, let me give you a hug. I'm your friend. I love you. I want to be with you. We don't do enough of it because that's the way we are, the stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
And I saw it in psychiatry, that it's not all about pills. It's about friendship, talk about your issue, give somebody a hug. It works. It is useful. That's what we are. We're humans.
Listen, Dr. Pankhania, I am one of life's huggers. What can I say? Producers there, every time they see me, I keep hugging them. One day I'm probably going to get very told off for it. I don't know. 0345, thank you very much indeed. You've been an absolutely delightful guest, and I very much hope you come on again. 0345 6060973. We are going to do some taboo busting. We have 40 minutes to do it. I want to have an open and honest conversation about mental health and what is holding us back and why is there still a stigma? There shouldn't be. 0345 6060973. You are listening to Sangita Myska on LBC.